Thomas Dutch Lytle, his father Frank Jr., his father Frank Sr., his father Thomas Lytle, and mother, name unknown, enslaved.
And when did you find out about your family history?
I think it was 2012. I was doing an ancestry family tree. I added Thomas Lytle from Randolph County, North Carolina, to my tree, and one of those ancestry shaky leaves popped up. And it was a long list of names. Beside every name was the phrase, sold to. And that was emotional. It told me that I was a descendant of an enslaver, and I didn't like it. It felt like a gut punch. My response was to shut off the computer. I left it alone for a couple of days. But I went back out of curiosity and a desire to understand. My partner was black. Had thought about race, and now I realize that the American story of slavery wasn't an ugly chapter in the history book. It was my history.
All right, and so how did you feel about it after you had some time to think?
Well, I think I got more curious. I started to build my tree. I reached out and discovered Rick Vigeland. I saw his article called White Families, Black Roots. I read that. He talked about his goal to find that. He mentioned the fact that the Lytle family had documents and papers that would allow African Americans who didn't know all of their history to find it, and that there was a journey to find Lytle descendants, and that really intrigued me. Rick and I have become a team over 10 years in telling Lytle stories and doing Lytle research and meeting more descendants of the whole family, including African Americans, which has been a very positive and amazing experience.
You have any additional stories you'd like to share?
Well, the fact that got to pause on that one. Let me think about that a different way. You do edit, right? It's been amazing to make the discoveries, to actually get to know cousins. For example, we made contact with a branch of the family, African American, in Maryland, and we did a presentation together on Zoom through the African American Historical Association of Western Maryland. 3 black cousins, 2 white cousins, how we found each other, and getting to know those, it was Rick and I and 3 others, and to getting to know them, their families, and look at current history, and to discover things like my branch of the family left Randolph County with the mass exodus of Quakers and free people of color in the 1830s. Their branch of the family stayed to this day, but a lot of them left in the Great Migration of the early 1900s and went on to New York, New Jersey, some to Maryland. And just to through my family, to know the scope of American history from pre-colonial at this place in Randolph County, through Civil War, through civil rights, through the politics of the 1835 when free colored men in the state of North Carolina lost the vote. The vote was taken away from them. And that's when my family got out of the state. We began to pass as white in Indiana. And just to know my family gives me a broader appreciation of what it means to be an American, and that we are one huge, diverse family. And that means a lot.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so tell us your name.
My name is Gary Wyatt.
which of the Lytles are you descended from?
I'm a descendant of Pink Lytle, and she was, after her was Jenny Lytle, and then after that was Jessie Lytle.
All right. And how did you find out about your Lytle family connections?
I always had some knowledge of the Lytle family, and I was aware of Rick's work on the Lytle genealogy that he did. But it really was a photograph that my father had that he was told was his paternal side great-grandfather, who would have been Daniel Wyatt. So for years, I thought the photo we had was Daniel Wyatt. But I happened to be looking in a publication called My Sketches of Ashboro, and I saw this gentleman, white-haired gentleman named Jessie Lytle. And I put it together that this was the same photo of the person that we thought was Daniel Wyatt. So that was kind of the beginning of the whole genealogy thing for me.
And how did you feel about it when you found out about it?
You've got a text message.
I was ecstatic, I was excited, and for me, it came full circle. There were many times when my father would come out to North Carolina to visit his family, and I declined to join him and come out with him. And so coming out, just learning about the Lytles, coming to this reunion has just brought me full circle, and just knowing that I come from descendants of free people, which the line of Jessie Lytle were free, and I'm just really feel blessed to be able to share this story.
All right. Do you have any other stories you would like to share?
Not right at this time,
Okay.
but I tell you what, this has just been a pleasure, and it's just the staff over at Randolph County Public Libraries, they've just been really helpful in uncovering a lot of things. So I thank you, Kendra.
All right. All right, go ahead.
My name is Shawn Ramsey. I'm descended from Francis Lytle of Randolph County.
And how did you find out about your Lytle history?
I was in my 20s. My mother gave me a call, and she said that she'd been going through some census records, and she found the word mulatto, and she said, well, you know what that means. And we both kind of giggled and said, oh my gosh, this is quite interesting, and she said she was going to pursue it further. And I got off the phone, and I had this memory of being a young girl, and my mother was combing my hair. My hair has always been very straight, fine, thin, and every now and then she would find very curly hair, and she would repeat a rather racist phrase to me, and I won't say the word, but I'll give you the idea of what she said. She plucked out the curly hair and waved it in front of me and said there was an N-word in the woodshed somewhere, in the woodpile somewhere. And this was said to me repeatedly as a child. I guess I had a lot of kinky little hairs that she liked to pull out. So when I got off the phone, it was like, she's been telling me that my whole life.
Yeah.
She didn't know she was telling me that my whole life. But I wondered if that was a way that mother to daughter, this information had been passed on without really saying what they were telling us.
Yeah. And how did you feel about it when you finally understood?
But that's what I'm saying. There was a sense of knowing, of, oh,
You always
I
knew?
already knew that.
Yeah.
I already knew that. And it kind of tickled me in a way that it answered things for me a little bit. Whenever I'd see something on the news, when they were doing civil rights marches and things like that, I would get very emotionally involved in that.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, maybe that's why. Maybe that's why.
They call it race memory.
Something really touched me about all that.
Yeah. You have any other stories you want to tell us?
So, she was doing more research,
Uh-huh.
and kept going, traveling and trying to figure things out. And she met a young man named Rick Vigland, who was working on the same tree. And together they put their heads together and they made much more progress working together. And it was quite interesting that he was younger than I was, and he was already an expert on things. So that was quite interesting. And then as she went along, she found a book. And she's reading this book called Tracing Your Black Roots. And she thought she could get more ideas of how to research, because in the past she was doing microfiche and all these things that
Right.
there was no ancestry back then.
Yeah.
You know, it was, you had to do everything by hand and go to the library and order this record and that record and wait months for it to come in sometimes. So it was always very aggravating, and I was always being sent to the library to check and see if this or that had come in, or check microfiche with her forever. So she found this book and thought it would give her some ideas, and she had already done a lot of the research herself. So she was reading this book, and one of the chapters was saying, check the wills. That sometimes enslaved people were listed in wills. And the person writing the book said, in my case, we hit the jackpot because we found a will saying, my Francis. And she's like, oh my gosh, that's what the will said in my family tree. So I'm related to this person. So she looks at the back of the book to see who the author is, and it's a little old black lady from Cincinnati, Ohio. And that was very eye-opening for us, because we had always assumed that because all of our family was white, we thought everyone had just married lighter and lighter and lighter and passed as white. And here's people that are obviously not passing as white, they're obviously black, and they're living in Cincinnati, Ohio. So all that was very exciting, that there was a black side of the family that we had never met. And I think in 1994, there was a get-together to celebrate 200 years of freedom, and my mother was very excited that it was going to be the black side of the family meeting the white side of the family and everything. Turns out after all these years that the woman who wrote the book isn't actually related to us. There was a misunderstanding about duplication of names, but it did open a whole window of thinking and a whole door of trying to find other descendants that didn't really look like us, and that they didn't know we existed, because they thought everyone just continued as they were, black, and we thought everyone continued as white. So it's just, I just love it that there's now a coming together, and I think that that's the full circle of it all, that we are coming together and recognizing we are all cousins, we're all related.
That's wonderful.
That's what I think. And I've learned so much. I've learned so much.
It's nice to know everybody's the same underneath.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. Okay, and your name is?
Lisa Bird,
And who are you descended from?
Pink.
And how did you find out about your Lytle family history?
Well, it started way back when I was a kid. I spent a lot of time at my grandmother's house, and she had all these photo albums. And I just loved going through the photo albums. But the problem is most of the people that I seen I didn't know. They were like people that were like in black and white pictures and things. So I would always ask my grandmother who all these different people were, and she would tell me. And I probably asked 5,000 times when I would come back, and yeah. So I got to the point where I would remember. So I seen the movie Roots, and I was very fascinated, like everybody else with family history. And I was like, that would really be cool if I could ever go back that far and, figure out who my family was that far back. And I didn't do anything about it. But then after a while, then I started looking through Ancestry and doing some research. And I started off with who my grandmother was telling me that was in the family besides who I already knew. And that's how I started out. And then I started getting leaves, little hints and hints and hints were popping up. And I was like, I wonder who these people are, And I have a great aunt who's alive, and I would verify some of these people, and she would confirm who they are, when they were born, and what area they lived in, and that sort of thing. And it confirmed. So I went ahead and would add them to my tree. And it got to a point where I got way beyond my aunt's knowledge, and she would get very excited. And I just kept going and going until I ran into a Sam Lytle. I did not know who Sam Lytle was. Nobody ever talked about him. But it turned out that he was my great-grandfather. So I was like, okay, let me see if I can find more out about him. More things started popping up when I added him to my tree. And I found out he was in Carolina. That's where he had been, born. But he had moved to Cumberland, which is where I'm from. So I did more research, and the name Lytle is like Smith. So it's like trying to find an ant in a molehill. And I was like, okay, so I gave up because I was like, okay, here's the Sam Lytle, here's the Sam Lytle. There was some in South Carolina as well as North Carolina. It was all over the place. So I said, okay, I quit. So I stopped looking. And a little while later, I got an email through Ancestry from Gary Wyatt. And he said, I'm related to you. And I was like, okay, really? I didn't really believe him because it's the internet. So I would ask him a few questions about different family members to see if he would know who people were, and get him to talk and see, if things matched up. And they were. And then he sent me pictures of people that he knew in his family, and they were pictures that my grandmother had that I had seen. And there were pictures like at cemeteries and stuff like that, and my family members were in the pictures. I was like, okay, he's related. So we stayed in contact, and he introduced me to Tom and to Rick. And then from that point, it's like history, because then he got us all the way back to Pink and was explaining everything, all the different connections and everything. And I would pass that information on to my family who doesn't know. So that's how that goes. Also to my son, my youngest son, who's like really deeply interested in it now. So.
Well, that's great.
Yes.
So how did you feel about it, though, when you found out?
I was amazed because, like I said, I never thought that I would get that far back. Talk about the 1800s, probably even the 1700s. I never thought I would get that far back to know about anybody. So I thought that was really fascinating. And it kind of, to have the name Pink, that just kind of typified like the way they named people back then. And I was like, okay, then, that's kind of strange. But it seemed to me that she was the type of person that was like the maternal people in our family, very strong. There was a lot of strong women in our family who like pretty much raised other parts of the family very, very strong. Whether the men was there or not, they were there, but sometimes they weren't, and they just took over. So that just kind of typified what type of person she was and how we could get that characteristic in our family.
Yep. So. You have any other stories you'd like to tell?
Like what? Give me an example. Like
just anything you'd like to share about your family history.
Well, I found out, and I didn't know this. My grandmother used to always talk about a big house, and I assumed that she was talking about like where they worked at. Mm-hmm. I come to find out during my research that was actually where my great-grandfather, he had owned the house. He had his own business in Cumberland where he actually owned a tavern or saloon is what they refer to it. Mm-hmm. And I verified it through the census reports, and every year he had to reapply for a liquor license, and the town newspaper had his name in it where he would reapply every year. And so that was very interesting. And it was interesting to find all the different census reports and who all lived in the house. It was a huge house because they had borders and everything. So I found that was very interesting. He kind of disappeared off the map, so I don't know where he went. The other interesting thing is that my grandmother's aunt, she lived in Los Angeles, and so did my grandfather. They lived in the same house. And at some point she ended up going to the Jim Jones thing. Yeah. And so she ended up dying in that. So that was kind of interesting. So I was like, okay, I remember hearing about the whole story like in the 70s. Because, I was old enough to remember that. But, or 80s, 70s or 80s. I can't remember which one. But I think it was late 70s or something. But yeah, I would have never known that. That was something.
Okay, well, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, can you tell us your name?
Sheila Knox.
And who are you descended through?
I go from Frank Sr. to Frank Jr. to Reverend James Lytle And then his son died young after he gave birth to my great grandmother, and then Reverend James Lytle raised her. So that's.
All right. And when did you find out about your family history?
I found out when I joined Ancestry about 2017, and I started researching my tree, having no clue, just going branch at a time and going as deep as I could go, and still trying to make sure there's a lot of junk out there, so trying to make sure that that's verifiable. And yeah.
Right.
Oh, wait, what more did you want?
How did you feel about it when you
Oh.
found out about your family history?
Oh, I was fascinated by it. I was not, I mean, it was like, wow. It was interesting, so much more interesting than other parts of my tree. Oh, and the reason I really got into it is when I was doing the research, I stumbled upon Rick's article he had written for Finding My Roots, or whatever. And that just like, wow. I contacted Rick. I tried to get as much information as I could about that. And I just was really fascinated with it. My great grandmother, unfortunately, she was Sarah Ellen Lytle. She died the year I was born. So, and I don't even know if she knew her history, because my cousins sure don't, and some don't want to know. It's interesting
Yeah.
to me.
Yep, everybody's a little different.
Yes, but to me it's interesting and rich.
You have any stories you'd like to share with us?
I kind of just did. Yeah.
All right then. Thank you.
And your name?
I'm Rick Vigland.
And who are you descended from?
I'm descended from Frank Lytle Sr. through his son Frank Jr., known as Francis, and his son Luke Lytle.
All right. And how did you learn about your family history?
Step by step, the slow way. And in fact, I was still in high school, working my way backwards through census records when I came across ancestors who were listed technically as free colored. And it took a few more steps after that. A few years later, out of college, I found the Randolph County Genealogical Society, and I ordered all the back issues that came in a large box and went through them one at a time until I came across the estate records of Thomas Lytle, where he set out to emancipate his children. They weren't given as such, but it was very clear that that was what was going on. And there was so much more you learn around that, surrounding that, that really confirms all the, the suspicions of parentage and some things like that. And when I found it, it was kind of exciting to find something different.
Yep.
I was in a genealogy society in Oregon, and all these little old ladies had their projects. And I came across free colored in the census, and I thought, well, that's something that nobody else has.
Yeah.
I said, there's got to be a story here. But it took a long time to get further back. A few years after college, I had the privilege to travel with work. So I came here to Randolph County, and I went to Raleigh, and I got my hands on the original papers. And so a wealth of information, over 300 pages in the Thomas Lytle estate. And that's the real story.
And that's in the archives in Raleigh?
They are. Mm-hmm. Had lots of help from the staff of the Randolph Room. One of the early ones, I'm going to blank on her name, took me all over the county.
Yeah.
showed me everything, introduced me to people, helped me sort out who's related, who's not.
Yeah.
And this whole time I was working with Sean's mother on things, and having found all this information in the bulletins and the estate papers, who do you think's the first person I turned to? It was Sean's mother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did you feel about your discoveries?
I was honestly excited because it was something so different and unique. It's fun to find something new,
Yeah.
something different, something to tell people about. Just that's all I can say is it was fresh and new.
Right. And you've been doing these family reunions for
Right.
a while?
This is our 8th, and the first one was in 1990, so they're not very often. We did hold one in Randolph County in 1994, and most of them over the years have had about 20 or 30 people. We've had one that had about 60 and one that had about 80, and now we've got over 100 finally.
Oh.
And at long last, we do have black branches of the family here because we've been reaching out, researching, tracing descendants, finding them, telling them our half of the story, and asking about their half of the story.
So have you found descendants from all of the children, or just some?
We have found, I know where a lot of them are. I won't say I'm in touch with every branch. We've reached out. We don't always hear back. But there were 6 children: Frank, Joe, Sam, Esther, Jack, and Pink. And we are in touch with, of course, Frank's descendants. Joe and Sam, we've lost track. Don't know what happened to them. They're lost. We found them in the 1830 census, but no further. Esther, we know some descendants. We've had a little bit of contact. Jack, most of his family moved to Ohio, and some of them served in the Civil War from there. And Pink has descendants here with us for the reunion. In addition to that, we have found matches through DNA. We know that some of our cousins that were sold in 1829 were taken to Alabama. And we have strong DNA matches to families in Alabama, and we're in touch with them. None of them could make it here today, but we are. I don't know if we're only scratching the surface. We may have a long ways to go,
Sounds like
but
it.
this is a giant step. This reunion, just to get this many people together and share our stories.
Great. You have any more stories you'd like to share?
Too many. Too many.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right, and what is your name?
My name is Ray Shaw.
And who are you descended from?
Well, I'm learning
Okay.
where I'm descended from, and that's been a big thing about coming to this reunion, was to learn, where have I come from? I come from the Frank Lytle line. Can't give you the details all the way down. My mother was quite a historian. She worked closely with Tom Brown, sort of his mentor. She had all of the family history. She tracked genealogy for years and went over all of this with Tom. And a lot of the things that we're learning now were suspected,
Right.
but not verified. So I wasn't shocked by what we've learned, but very intrigued and curious. And coming from the era and seeing all of everything that happened in the 60s and the way things have progressed and attitudes, the way they were when I was a child, to today, being familiar with all of that, but yet being isolated, because where I grew up, we were a small town in Idaho, isolated. I mean, everybody I knew was white. Everybody in the town that I came from was pretty much relative, because our families had moved there early And we're part of the people that settled in that area, and therefore a lot of the people in the town
Right.
came from them. So, related to most of the people. But so it's really been fascinating to learn more of where we came from. And yeah, I'm embracing it and getting to know it. I don't know how deep I want to go into this, but I was raised on a fruit ranch. So we interacted with a lot of people that traveled, picking fruit. We worked with a lot of Hispanics, and I worked closely with those people and interacted with them. So I've been familiar with people of different color and that were different than myself, and I've always interacted with them well. I can remember that I used to go to court with some of the Mexicans that worked in the orchard because they didn't speak English.
Right.
But I spoke enough from working with them to understand, so I would be their interpreter for the judge who might, if they got a traffic accident in the wintertime.
Yeah.
When the roads are slick, the judge would let them off with a warning. If it's snowing outside, you have to stop and think, okay, the speed limit's 35, but it might not be wise to go 35. You need to adjust the way you think to the conditions. So I explain that to them. So I've had some interaction with people of other cultures, real comfortable with that. So I've been fascinated by learning our story
Yeah.
and getting to know a little bit more from where I come from. I embrace it, like I say, yeah.
So you're good with the whole story then?
Now some of the things I'm learning about
I
the
mean,
slave trade and everything is not.
What I meant was
but
the fact that you come from that. You're good with that.
I'm good with that, yes, yeah. In fact, I think I can take some pride in that.
Yeah.
Don't have a problem with that, so,
Great.
yeah.
You have any other stories you want to tell us?
Boy. No, probably not.
Okay.
Nothing is coming to mind. I've got lots of stories, but they might not pertain.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. And your name is?
Ruth Dobrisky.
And who are you related through?
I come from the Frank and Thomas Dutch Lytle, and on down through two grandmothers, my dad and myself.
All right. And when did you learn about your family history?
Within the last 10 years, maybe even 5 or 6. Tom, of course, has been doing a lot of research, and he and Rick knew much sooner, and so the word was passed down, and I'm a little bit surprised, but definitely not shocked. And what made the whole process seem much closer was that when my grandmother was 13 years old, she had a bad experience at school, and her parents pulled her out and sent her back to Nebraska to help take care of her great-grandfather, which was Thomas Dutch Lytle. Now, he's just 3 generations away from Frank. And to think that my grandmother took care of, it'd be her great-grandfather, just kind of reduced a whole bunch of years once I learned that. And, my grandmother was always kind of a spitfire, and it didn't surprise me that she had some kind of an altercation at school and didn't successfully do well, with the norms of classroom. But what I regret is not talking to her about what it was like as a teenager to be, and did she know that he was of color? I would think by 3 generations away, there would be some appearance, but I'm not sure because they started out mulatto, and so I don't know what it was like then. But we've learned since that her mother put a squash on the story, and so it may have been more readily known sooner had that not happened. And she was pretty adamant that that not come out. And like my cousin Ray shared, his mom investigated and probably had strong suspicions, but it's only been since Rick and Tom have been doing the research that they know for sure. What was kind of interesting was when Tom shared this information with my grandchildren. And my grandson had been playing high school baseball, first base, and he had jumped really high and caught what looked like an uncatchable ball. And some of his teammates started saying, "Kobe, Kobe, Kobe." And so he had the biggest grin on his face when Tom shared this story with him, and he looked at his mom and said, "Kobe." And they've adjusted to it very well too. And I think we do take some pride in the fact, not in the fact that they were slaves to begin with,
Right.
but the fact that we have a family who worked hard to emancipate, and who we've learned of Quakers that worked really hard to emancipate people. And while the stories are anything less than delightful, we know we don't have a part of that, but we do have a part of changing things now. And I think more than ever, I feel a greater, not obligation, but desire to, whatever you can do to make things right.
You come from a long line of strong people.
Yes, yeah.
It's good to know those sort of things.
Yeah.
You have any other stories you want to tell, or?
I think that kind of concludes what
Okay.
what is appropriate for this particular setting.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
All right. And what is your name?
I am Gwendolyn Huertas.
Okay. And how are you related?
I am Esther Little's sixth granddaughter.
Wow. And how did you learn about your family history?
From a DNA test. I got curious, and I've never been close to my father's family. I actually went to Ancestry looking for my mom's family and evidence that I was Native American, and it comes to find out that found a whole another line of family.
That's always good, finding more family. So how did you feel when you finally found all these people?
I was elated because I other than my grandparents on my dad's side and my aunts and first cousins, I knew no one on my dad's side of the family. So this family history coming up and being revealed has been very exciting, very elevating to be able to know where my family come from, their history, and things that they've done in their lives and stuff like that. That some I can be proud of, some I can't be proud of, but all together it's my family, and I have to accept it.
Yep. Come from a long line of strong people.
Yes.
And how did you feel about when you found out? How did you feel about it?
A lot of it was like, I knew it. I knew it. And it's like, I've been telling people all the time, I'm a melting pot of culture and ethnicities. So I don't hate nobody. I don't hate anybody. I love everybody. And for you not to know who your lineage is, you should love everybody too, because you don't know where you come from.
Right.
A lot of our family members through Ancestry found out that they were black, and they had to accept it and embrace that knowledge. And I'm all here for it. I'm here to learn more and find out more, and hopefully it makes me a better person in the end.
Okay. You have any stories you'd like to share?
One of the stories that I read about Esther, that I found was very interesting. Somebody shot her dog, or she shot somebody's dog, and in the end, I think it was her brother or something like that, shot her. And I'm like, and from that, this family pretty much separated. and I'm thinking they celebrated down the color line, and I'm not quite sure, but that's kind of like what I was reading.
Yeah, I've
But-
heard that story, read it somewhere.
But that was very interesting to me.
Yeah, whoever it was that shot her dog, I think, ended up being hanged, maybe? I don't know. I don't remember off the top of my head, sorry. All
But
right.
I'm looking forward to hearing more stories and finding out more and answering all the little questions that I have on most of them anyway.
As many as you can?
Yes.
Yeah, it's hard to do.
Mm.
All right. Anything else you'd like to share?
I just wish that the rest of my family was as interested as I am in this, so
So
that I could
true.
have somebody that was close to me to sit back and talk to, and instead of having to call people from across the country.
Right.
But I don't mind that either.
Right.
To find out and connect puzzle pieces.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, can you tell us your name?
It's Robin Gray.
And which of the Lytles are you descended from?
I'm descended from Pink, who is the sister of Frank Sr. So Pink had many children, but one of her daughter, she had a daughter Jenny, and who had a son Jesse, and then who had a son Joseph, and that was my grandmother's father. So it's kind of like the line in a nutshell.
Okay, and when did you find out about your Lytle history?
Just a couple years back, I actually did not know anything about my, much more beyond my grandmother's mother and father's name that we'd seen on some license or certificate at one point. And that's really all we had. We didn't know anything much more. She had little bit stories sometimes, but not a lot of detail. And our family moved from New York to California, and at that point there was no more relatives nearby except for a couple aunts that told us some stories, but we didn't really have a lot of more information than that. Rick had sent an email. It had come by way of a stepsister, some other family members with the same Barker last name, and they reached me. And after talking to him, I found out a whole lot of history. Went all the way back to the 1700s, and it was fascinating. Especially since we didn't know that there was any beyond the great-grandparents, so it's pretty neat.
And how did you feel about it when you found it?
Well, at first it's just interesting, like wow. And then you start looking a little deeper, and you start hearing the details and the stories, and it was like, wow, some of it's just fascinating, some of it's just heartbreaking, especially some of the trials that Pink and her children had, and having to lose some of her children after she'd already been free. It was just so much, and it's heartbreaking. But again, it's like it feels good to know you have all this family there. It's inspiring because of some of the stories that we heard of Jesse Lytle and how he was well known in his town that he lived in, and really interesting stories there. Even my grandmother, and the life that she had, and how hard it was for her, and how she persevered. And so it's inspiring also. Yeah.
Have any other stories you'd like to share?
I do, a couple. Recently, a couple of years back, after I spoke to Rick, but I really didn't follow through much for a little while until I did my DNA. And my second cousin, Gary Wyatt, he had found me after we reconnected. I had found some old pictures of when he was little, when we were little as children, and our parents would get together, or I should say, yes, our parents would get together. And so and then we didn't see them for 40, 50 years. So it was really exciting to reconnect. And then he had told me some stories about how when sometimes his family, they traveled around. I think he was in the Air Force. And so my grandmother at one point went to visit and stay with him. And he told me stories about my grandmother, it's just fun. And it's nice to hear these things all these years later. Also, when I was about 15, I think, I'm not quite sure, my grandmother decided to go visit her relatives in North Carolina. We were in California. And she told me bits and pieces of her life here and there. And at one point she said, when she divorced her husband, she lived in New York and it was hard to get her divorce, so she got on a train and came to California. And I remember her telling me, and she said, I want to just get as far away from him as possible. She got herself on a train and came all the way to LA on her own with a couple of her kids. And I just thought, like I said, an inspiring woman, very independent. And now I'm going to do that thing where I forgot what I was going to. Oh, I had one more short story, but I can't remember what it was.
You all right?
Yes.
You're good. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's tell us a story.
So one more I'd like to share. Some, again, it was my grandmother. And I remember her telling me a story at one point about, I think she was her grandfather. And she said she was real little. And she said all she remembers is this big, tall, big guy. And he had white hair. And coming in and picking her up and giving her a big old hug. And she said it was her grandfather, her grandpa. And I always assumed, because we didn't know what our background was. We didn't know a whole lot of detail. And I just assumed maybe it was some Scottish guy or something. She said with white hair. And now, years later, I see the picture of Jesse Lytle with his snowy white hair, and I'm thinking that must have been him she was talking about. So,
Sounds like
just a neat story.
all right.
Thanks.